Hello, good morning. This is Mr. Hahn addressing American history for the completion of the class that we had yesterday on Thursday, the 6th. I'm going to finish up with a few comments about the War of 1812, Louisiana Purchase. And I promise not to take much time from you. I have started my stopwatch, so I'm at 15 seconds already. I'm going to keep myself to 20 minutes or less, I hope less. And I appreciate your taking the time to listen to me talk about these things, which I do think are very important, but there wasn't possibly enough time to get to it yesterday when we were looking at all that stuff about Hamilton and Jefferson. This kind of puts a wrap on all of that. I promise you to show a cat later, at least one, if I can get my hands on them. They're running around right now, wrecking the furniture and eating the plants, so I should be able to snare one after they get really tired toward the end. Stick around for the secret word later. I will give you the secret word, and you can write that on the top of your take-home quiz. Just write secret word at the top of the quiz, and you'll get 3 extra points for having survived this extra session of the class. I'm going to share the screen now, and that should mean that when I go to the PowerPoint, you'll see the map and then a little me up in the corner. The me doesn't have to be, any bigger than that. I think that's fine. We'll put me over here. You've seen me before. And I know what you're thinking as we start out. I know the questions that are on your mind as it's still dark outside, 6:30 on a Friday morning. You're asking yourself, is he wearing shoes? And I'm not going to tell you the answer to that question, but I know that that is what's on your mind right now. Let's think about this instead. When I talk about America's exceptional nature as a country, here's one great example. Can you think of another nation in history which by war or peace doubled its size in a single stroke and kept it that way? The Louisiana Purchase represents an enormous change in the course of America's history. And in a way, it pulls Thomas Jefferson, who believed in farming and the rural agrarian society, it pulls him in directions that he didn't want the country to go in terms of his governing philosophy. But he couldn't resist. It was utterly necessary for him to take this step, and so he did. To start with, Jefferson realized that the Western farmers, the people over the Appalachian Mountains and still east of the Mississippi in that kind of light blue territory, the old Northwest Territory, they were farmers just like the agrarian republic he wanted to support, and they needed to get their goods to market. The only way to market was not back east over the mountains. It was down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to New Orleans at the Gulf of Mexico. And that's, of course, owned by France at this time. It had been in Spanish territory and then French and back and forth. Now it's under French control. So he decides to send ambassadors to France to negotiate for the purchase of the city of New Orleans, and then that little bit of territory, which is now kind of part of Louisiana and part of Mississippi and part of Alabama, that little slice there to the north of the Mississippi. He wants to get that little slice to meet it all up and make it nice and neat. And he enables his ambassadors to offer as much as the princely sum of $2 million US, just $2 million. Remember, the entire budget under Jefferson was well under $10 million at this time. So he's offering a big slice of what would have been an additional, slice to what would have been the budget, the kind of thing that you would see Hamilton doing, but he feels it's necessary to support the trade of the Western farmers. Well, Napoleon over there is in the middle of war, a total war with Europe, which eventually will pull America into the War of 1812. This is where it really starts. And Napoleon has decided that he is not going to pursue any plans to conquer the New World. Thank you, Toussaint Louverture with the rebellion in Haiti has just soured him on the whole idea of taking over the New World. So he wants to dump it. This is all of the French territory on the continent of North America. What you see there in the light green and some of that little blue there down near the bottom in the modern day state of Louisiana, all of that is under French control. And he turns around to the ambassadors and says, never mind that piker little offer. I'll sell you all 15 million acres of this land for $12 million, 6 times what they were authorized to accept. Now, bear in mind, there's no internet, there's no cell phones. The 3 ambassadors have to make up their mind there while they're in France. And they swallow hard, they gulp, and they say, sure, we'll do that. And you can just imagine the scene as they sail back across the Atlantic and they come into Jefferson's office and they say, great news, Mr. President, and also some other news as well. And then Jefferson probably faints and they have to use smelling salts and get him to come back. But what a deal. What an incredible deal. Now, let's just brush over the fact that there's no reasonable way in which the French own this territory. None. They haven't been out here. The Spanish haven't been out here. Nobody's explored any of this country. Native Americans are living on it, but that doesn't matter. That's not a factor as America negotiates with France. Nobody pays attention to the possible needs of the Native Americans. So Jefferson decides, of course, he has to accept this offer, but as a narrow constructionist, he's thinking, well, this isn't really in the Constitution. This is not something that the federal government's allowed to do. Spend all this money. That's not it. That's not one of his principles. Expand the power of the federal government to this extent. That's not one of his principles. He decides maybe we should ask to pass an amendment that specifically says we have the right to make the Louisiana Purchase at this price. And at that point, I think you have to give credit to his advisors and leaders in the Senate. They say, boss, no, we can just say this is a treaty. And the Constitution does give us the power to make treaties. Relax, it'll be okay. But it is not exactly narrow construction. It's not exactly a fiscally conservative move. So Jefferson is pulled into some contradictions here, as he was with the Marbury versus Madison case, as he was with the Burr conspiracy. He's forced to kind of compromise some of his principles in favor of others. But the country is now on a course to be tremendously bigger, to possibly be a great power at some point in the future. And nobody knows, as I said, what this territory looks like. So in two great expeditions, the Lewis and Clark, and we should say also Sacagawea expedition of 1804, and then the Zebulun Pike expedition, what a great name, Zebulun Pike, he goes more straight west straight across the Great Plains and into what is actually Spanish territory. They explore they take a couple of shots through this great region, and they discover that the sort of dark green area here is really quite hard. It's practically a desert. This is where we encounter nomadic Indians, the buffalo, the Great Plains. But up there in the light green area, where the words Lewis and Clark are, the modern day states of Oregon, Washington, a little bit more, that Pacific Northwest, what we're going to again call the Northwest Territory a little later, that's fantastic. That's a fantastic land. And that ends up getting settled much sooner than the territory in the middle. Zebulun Pike goes right across modern day Nebraska and Colorado, and he comes back to advise President Jefferson to just leave it to the Indians. That's his advice. Don't bother with this territory. It's so hard and foreboding at that time. Of course, that's going to change, and I have to talk about that. So a tremendous change to the country. Now we have to talk about the War of 1812 as efficiently as I can. Both sides, Washington, Hamilton, Jefferson, everybody would have liked to avoid foreign entanglements with Europe. But the fact is that foreign entanglements are coming here. The French Revolution has evolved by 1800, 1804 into what we call total war. The French have armed everybody. They've ascribed to the same idea of a militia fighting the war that the Americans did. That's part and parcel of a revolution, is that the citizens are going to fight these wars, which means armies have exploded in size. The demands of war are now huge. You do everything you possibly can to defeat the enemy. There are no limits on war anymore. And Britain's attitude in this period is that we're going to use the power of our navy, the largest navy, to achieve our goals. So they blockade French ports and every place that Napoleon conquers. They blockade that in order to achieve their ends, and that draws America into the conflict. Because while America would like to stay neutral, their idea of neutral is almost childishly naive, that we should just be allowed to sail wherever we want and trade with whomever we want while you guys are fighting. Just hold up, stop shooting for a sec, we're sailing through. That's never going to happen. The British and the French both engage in what's called seizure and impressment. Seizure is the confiscation of cargo. When they grab an American merchant ship, they take the cargo, the food, the clothing, whatever it is that's on board, and they just take it. Maybe they pay, maybe they don't, but they seize it. It's seizure of the cargo. But they also, and particularly the British over time, engage in impressment of the American sailors. They not just take over the cargo of the ship, they say, hey, you're in the British Navy now, and they force them to work for the British Navy under the harshest, most horrifying conditions. The Navy in England was well disciplined, but just nightmarish, floggings and terrible discipline and horrendous food and hard fighting. So this is a tremendous shock and a great outrage to the American people. We're a country, we're free, we're independent. You can't do this to us. But the British adopt this bizarre view that, you were British citizens. You never stopped being British citizens. Just because your country's independent doesn't mean you're not a British citizen anymore. So His Majesty has a use for you in our Navy. And they just do it. It's absolutely an act of war by anybody's definition. But the Americans have to kind of wonder what they're going to do about it. And adding to the problem that the British and the French are so consumed with their war in Europe that they're not paying attention to threats like that of the Barbary pirates, this very romantic period in history. Northern parts of Africa are being occupied by tribes and clans that have turned to piracy, and they're raiding shipping on the Atlantic and in the Mediterranean. And the British and the French are so focused on fighting each other that they decide not to deal with the Barbary pirates. They just pay them. They just pay them a ransom every year to leave their shipping alone, which means the Barbary pirates are really picking on American shipping, and the American Navy's not big enough to handle the problem. So we just suffer. That we refuse to pay them, but we just suffer. Our ships are sometimes boarded and our crews killed, and of course the cargo's taken by these pirates off of the coast of North Africa, Tripoli and places like that. So this is becoming a tremendous problem in the early 1800s, and something that Jefferson has to have a response to. His response is to declare an embargo of trade with Europe, which is to say we refuse to trade. You think of embargo as something that goes along with boycott, these economic weapons, right? A boycott is a refusal to buy. An embargo is a refusal to trade, or if you will, a refusal to sell to the other side, the party that you're having a problem with. So Jefferson declares that Americans will no longer trade with Europe. And he thought that was going to work because we make the food and Britain and France don't. So that should work out fine for us, but it doesn't. It doesn't. Both sides are hurt by the embargo. Yes, the British and the French are hurt to some extent, but America also suffers from the lack of trade. And it's not successful. A lot of American captains, like they did with the British, try to smuggle and try to get their goods through anyway. And now Jefferson has to do the job of trying to catch smugglers, which is just what the English were doing before the American Revolution. He's starting to look like the same as the English king did in a way earlier. And the whole thing really just wears him down. He can't figure out how to do this within his own principles, and he certainly doesn't want to declare war. Jefferson retires in 1808 and turns the reins over to James Madison, who sort of inherits this problem. And it gets worse and worse over the course of the next term, Madison's next term, which establishes a nice, peaceful, orderly transfer of power, by the way. Jefferson was president. He's from Virginia. He serves for 2 terms. He steps down. Madison, also from Virginia, was Secretary of State in the first term. He became vice president in the second term. And now Jefferson steps aside and nominates Madison to replace him. And we start to see what's called the Virginia dynasty. We had George Washington, who served for 2 terms, then Adams in between. But now the more Virginians, Jefferson, Madison, and you're eventually going to get Monroe as well. Nice orderly transfer of power. But this problem with conditions in Europe and America continues to get worse. The British are stirring up the Native Americans again. Tecumseh and the Prophet Native American tribes in the old Northwest, the Ohio Territory, are setting the frontier on fire again. The British are interfering and helping them out. Impressment and seizure continues on the sort of Atlantic side, and it's becoming increasingly a British offense because the British are taking over the sea. They're winning the great naval battles, and the French are no longer able to control the seas. So these problems are always occurring with the French now, with the British now. And the problems are getting worse and worse as the nature of the war intensifies. And within Madison's party, 3 men rise up they're called the Warhawk faction, who are starting to say, we have to go to war with Britain over this. We've got to punish them. We've got to stop them. And their names are John Calhoun, Henry Clay, and Daniel Webster. And the thing about these three guys is, if your mom ever says, boy, I've just been on Facebook and I've run out of memes that have weird looking guys in them, you can say, Mom, I've got your problem solved right here. Because here are three of the weirdest looking guys you've ever seen. They're in order from left to right. There's John Calhoun, who looks like, Professor Brown from Back to the Future. And then Henry Clay with the enormous chest and the big chin. And then Daniel Webster, who, looks like he combs his hair with Elmer's glue. These are three of the great leaders of American politics in the middle of this century. From now until just about the Civil War, these are the three guys who are going to dominate Congress. And yeah, they look weird, but they're incredibly intelligent men. And notice that they come from each region of the country. We have John Calhoun from the South. We have Henry Clay from what we call the West. Tennessee is over the Appalachians. That's the West, the new region of the country. And then Daniel Webster from New Hampshire. So three men, each from one of the new sections, the three new sections of the country, and they're each going to guide their nation between the three of them through the next intervening decades. All three very ambitious, all three very intelligent, all three want to be president, all three run for president several times. None of them become president, but they are extremely influential, and a good way to sort of remember these three sections of the country that now have one issue in common, that they really want to fight the British, that this is enough is enough. And so America declares war against the British and triggers the War of 1812. It's a ridiculous war in many ways. It's not fought like the American Revolution. The British are not coming here to try and conquer us and put us into their empire. They just are fighting with us over these issues that we've touched on. Total war requires them to get all the ships and all the personnel they can. They're not going to stop doing that. And America has to now go out and try to punish the world's largest navy, to attack them in their homelands, like across the sea or in Canada, and to fight against the Native Americans. And that's a much different kind of war. We don't do well at all in that kind of war. The British don't really want to fight us either. So there's fighting everywhere. In Canada, we invade Canada again. We fight on the Great Lakes, lots of naval fighting there. The British do land and burn Washington, D.C., which is a great humiliation to the country. This brand new city, our capital, they land and easily take D.C. James Madison has to evacuate. Dolly Madison very coolly directs the servants to save the paintings here and there and get them out of the White House. And it rains that afternoon, which saves the Capitol from burning completely to the ground. But it's a great embarrassment to the Americans. The Star-Spangled Banner is written when a man named Keyes is there to try and get some friends of his out of British hands. They've been captured and they're being held on board a British ship. So he's there on a ship and he watches the British Navy bombard the Fort McHenry, and he sees the smoke and the rocket's red glare, and he sees the flag. And so he's inspired and writes the lyrics to the Star-Spangled Banner, which are set to the music of a British drinking song, which, if you think about it, kind of makes sense. The Star-Spangled Banner is incredibly difficult to sing. Singers hate to sing the Star-Spangled Banner because it's so challenging. But if you think about it, just take away the lyrics and think that you're drunk, right? That is a drinking song. And he put these marvelous inspirational lyrics to this popular drinking song that was going around at the time. So that's symbolic of something very meaningful, I'm sure. We do have tremendous success in hard fighting against the Native Americans. We break their confederations in the West. William Henry Harrison defeats Tecumseh. Fascinating story. Oh, no time to cover it. And Andrew Jackson defeats the Creeks a little further south, breaking these confederacies, making that area east of the Mississippi much safer for settlement, really pushing Indians out of those territories more or less completely. And both those men, as war heroes, as generals, are going to become president of the United States one day, which is a pretty typical way for someone to climb all the way to the top, is to become a general and win great battles. It's ironic, but Andrew Jackson wins the Battle of New Orleans, this great battle against the British, repulsing larger numbers of the most disciplined troops in the world, wins a great victory, and Americans hear all about that. before they hear the news that the Treaty of Ghent has been signed over in Europe. The Treaty of Ghent says, status quo, says we will go back to the way we were before the fighting. So no matter what's happened over there in America, we're agreeing over here in Belgium that we'll give back whatever territory we had and we'll just stop the hostilities and go back to our original borders. So even if Jackson had lost the Battle of New Orleans, the British would have had to give the territory back. But the way the news hits America, they hear about Jackson's victory first because he's right there. And then the news gets across the Atlantic from Ghent that the war is over. And most Americans in their minds draw the conclusion that we've won a victory and that we've beaten the British, which is not true. But that's the way we come out of this war. In fact, both sides don't have to fight anymore because Napoleon has finally been defeated and exiled, and there's no need for the two to seize and impress or to stir up the Native Americans. The British don't have to keep annoying us the way they did. That's why the war is over. But Americans feel that what they've done is win a great victory, a second great victory against the British, which in reality really isn't true at all. That we didn't win either time. We just kind of hung on and did pretty well against the world's largest empire. But it's a misnomer to say that we beat them, but we feel that we've beaten them. Over time, British and American ties are going to improve, which is fine. And what happens in America is utterly remarkable. One of the last things I got to cover with you is that we launch into this era now known as the era of good feelings, in which there is no division between political parties for a short period of time, 4 or 5 years. The Federalist Party's gone. Jefferson established his legacy with Madison. Madison has now served for 2 terms. He steps aside, and James Monroe has come up through the ranks, Secretary of State, Vice President, now becomes president. And when he becomes president, Monroe famously says, let's have John Quincy Adams from Massachusetts, the son of John Adams, become Secretary of State, which is a signal that he's going to let even this guy from Federalist territory come into the chain of command and eventually become perhaps president of the United States in 1824. And so the country feels remarkably united. They feel a tremendous sense of nationalism and optimism. Here we have beaten the British twice. Look what we can do that European countries could never do. We start to explore the West. We're exploring the skies from America. New movements in American art, literature, and writing, that they're all supposedly uniquely American and expressing the will and the unique character of this great country. And just taking tremendous enthusiasm and optimism for how well our country has done. As a matter of fact, we sort of cap off this fight against the British, in which we believe we've won, by turning now to the Barbary pirates. Now the American Navy is bigger. Now we don't have to fight the British anymore. And we go sailing into North Africa and say, listen, about that tribute, bam, and we burn their cities and we destroy the Barbary pirate fleets and crush that conspiracy, that sort of illegal operation once and for all, which again, the British and the French never did, but Americans did. So we feel tremendous about how well we've done in this period and are very happy with our accomplishments in this era. No political divisions, no real political fights. Nobody is struggling from an opposing party to become president of the United States. And it's incredible to say that in this day and age, this sort of fairy tale about a unified period in American history, but we did have one. And I believe we could have one again. It's possible. The country was governed perfectly well in this period, and everything was running rather smoothly, really. So just something to keep in mind as you look forward in this class. It's not going to last forever. We are going to have divisions in this nation again, as we had before. All right, I'm going to stop the screen share. I have 2 things left to talk to you. I know I've gone a little bit over my time. First of all, the secret word. The secret word is foghorn. Foghorn is the secret word. If you write that across the top of your quiz, I'm going to give you 3 bonus points. There it is, 3 bonus points on the quiz, just for showing that you knew the secret word because you listened to this presentation. And secondly, I did promise to show you at least one cat. So if you give me 2 seconds, I'm going to try to grab one. These kittens are very agile. Hang on a sec. Oh, I got you. Yes, I have captured you. Yes, yes. I have a rare find today. This is Susie Q, who is by far the shyest and most squeamish of the entire lot. Here she is, relatively calm for a few seconds, but she was playing just a second ago. Oh, there she goes. I need to leave. I'm shy. The paparazzi. Well, here is Gus, who is much bigger and longer than Susie Q, but he has a little white spot right over here on top of his chin. That's how you can tell it's him, plus the fact that he's normally in trouble. Gus is much more relaxed. He likes to lie on my lap and prevent me from doing anything most of the day. Oh, your paws are wet. What a surprise. Have you gone and tipped over the water thing again because you're basically a fish? Yes, okay. So this is what I have to deal with when I'm trying to correct your papers and your homeworks. This is what gets in my way right here. The secret word is foghorn. I appreciate your time. Hope you enjoyed the presentation on the War of 1812 with cats. And I'll see you guys after the break. Take care.